You're listening to InfoSec Sidekick, the podcast that empowers InfoSec professionals with unique insights and expertise. I'm your host, Travis Romero, and today I'm excited to bring you an episode focusing on a crucial aspect of team dynamics within the realm of cybersecurity. Inclusivity and psychological safety are essential ingredients for fostering a thriving and effective workforce. Today, we delve into how these factors can be cultivated within the unique context of cybersecurity teams. Joining us is a renowned expert in the field and a personal friend of mine, Daniel Shore. Daniel is a PhD in organizational psychology with a specialization in cybersecurity teams. In this episode, we'll explore the significance of inclusivity within cybersecurity teams, the role of psychological safety in enhancing team performance, and the importance of fostering happiness and well-being in the workplace. Daniel will share his expertise, real-life examples, and practical tips to help organizations navigate these critical aspects of team dynamics. Whether you're a cybersecurity professional, a team leader, or simply curious about how to create a more inclusive, safe, and happy work environment, this episode is for you. Get ready to gain valuable insights and actionable strategies to transform your teams and elevate their potential. If you enjoy this episode, please feel free to share it and subscribe to the podcast. So, without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Daniel Shore. I'm here with Daniel Shore, PhD in organizational psychology. Daniel, you've been Daniel or Dan? Let's establish that. I've known you for quite a while, and it's really sad that I have to ask that question.
Yeah, well, you knew me before I was Dr. Daniel,
Okay.
but definitely Daniel for doing
All
the
right.
first.
We got to be formal on the podcast. I hear you. All right, cool.
Yeah,
cool.
I thought. We're dressed up, It's the
Oh
Black
man.
Tie podcast.
Yeah, you know it, man. You know it. For those that are just listening, I am wearing a Gucci suit, and Daniel is wearing what
Oscar
appears to be a
Taylor,
clown costume. Oh
Hey.
yeah, Oscar. Oh man. Yes. But
Clown
anyway,
suit. I didn't finish it. An Oscar De La Renta clown suit.
there you go. There you go. I love it, man. All right, cool. Hey, but yeah, Daniel Shore, I appreciate you being here. We met some time ago, but for people who are just tuning in, maybe didn't watch my past stint at trying a podcast. Back when I was just starting out, and you were kind enough to come on and offer your expertise on the human side of cybersecurity, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Tell us a little about yourself, who you are, what you do.
Yeah, I think the most important framing here, probably relative to most of your other guests, to my knowledge, is that I'm a social behavioral scientist, and I backed my way into cybersecurity rather than cyber first as a career focus. So I originally, I'll zoom out just briefly, originally was interested in kind of clinical psychology, supporting people and individuals, and then realized, I kind of want to do like groups and larger numbers of people. And I had an interest in sports psychology at one point, and I didn't really want to pigeonhole myself. So I found myself in an industrial organizational psychology program, what I refer to as workplace psychology. And it was at George Mason University right outside the DC area. So no surprise, government contracts are pretty readily available to jump onto in general, but not so much in social behavioral psychology, and certainly not at the intersection of social behavioral psychology and cybersecurity. And that's where I found myself from 2012 to 2017, was being part of the largest InfoSec study of social behavioral dynamics for cybersecurity teams. And the U.S. government, Department of Homeland Security, the Swedish government and their Civil Contingencies Agency, and then the National Cybersecurity Center in the Netherlands from the Dutch government, all teamed up kind of in their own multi-team system to have us study what were the behaviors of and people, people components, the human dynamics of successful cybersecurity multi-team systems. And we studied that both in the US and in Europe, in the private sector and the public sector. I tallied it up because I was really intrigued to figure out how many people hours did we as a research team put into that work. And the answer is over 56,000 people hours into understanding what those drivers were. Now, the good news is we produced a really big handbook for managers of cybersecurity teams, CSIRT, SOC.
Yeah, I've read it.
Yeah, see, I mean, the 300th page is where we saved all the good stuff for. And so when we did that, we really, our primary focus was to share the information both from the multi-team and teamwork research that kind of we stood on the shoulders of, and also all the lessons that we gleaned from the research we did and how it translated into strategies and recommendations for actually applying the research. That being said, it was a really big book, and it wasn't necessarily made widely available at first, primarily used by the government entities that helped fund it. We also partnered with Dartmouth and HP Labs at the time, Hewlett-Packard Labs. And it was kind of an insular product or deliverable. So I, at that moment, had a choice to make. Did I want to continue working on this as part of my career path and my journey, or did I want to move on? That was my choice that I had to make. Everyone else had to make it as well. We had a huge research team. And I was the only person who chose to make it my career path. I had some great support from professors at the university, and also, needed to navigate what was going to be the rest of this research and development process that had started under the government contract. And that got me at least to this podcast. So I'll tell you more about my work and what I do, but that's the background story of how I became a social behavioral scientist working in cybersecurity.
Very cool, man. And commendable too. I think that as a cybersecurity professional myself, and honestly, you are one as well. I always hear so much emphasis on the human side. I mean, we're all human. It's a constant. So there's so much important work to be done on it, but it's so much easier for some of the tech people in the industry to focus, rightfully, right, a lot of times on the 0 days and the red teaming and threat hunting and a lot about what I talk about on this podcast, to be honest.
Yep.
But it highlights why I'm really happy you're here to talk about the human side. We're going to talk about things like inclusivity on cybersecurity teams, psychological safety, motivating people, and how that all kind of incorporates into the teams. I'll let you speak on it mostly because you're the expert. But I did want to really quickly revisit, how we came into contact. So only because I think it's kind of interesting. At least
Me too. I'll validate that.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to talk about that. So just to very highly preface, we met at the Mid-Atlantic Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition, which is literally why I got into cybersecurity, and I can't speak highly enough about it. But how did that play a role in your research and how we met and everything?
Yeah, well, it reminds me of the moment that I got chosen, we'll put that in quotation marks, chosen to go to the cyber defense competition, because it was more of, we're sitting in the research lab, and one of the professors says, hey, there's this competition, some of the folks in DHS, recommended that maybe one of us go. It's up in Maryland. Does anyone want to drive, take a day, spend it there? And I don't know if I raised my hand or if my hand just kind of levitated eventually because no one else did. But when I got there, it was just a teaming with teams, working on this hypothetical scenario, this kind of fictitious scenario, and college students running everywhere. They have the whole setup, this town's cyber center, and they're having to protect the municipality and make decisions and gather information. And there's red teaming going on, that, the defense piece comes in of how good your college team is. And I made it my prerogative to interview participants and learn more. And at some point, you came over, or someone said, "Hey, Travis, go talk to that guy," and we started talking. And feel probably 6-7 years went by, and we reconnected on LinkedIn, and now we've been talking ever since.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. It's really crazy. Great competition. It's still running. I still know I have met people that I've hired now, which is crazy to think how much time has passed to where I'm actually in a seat to make those decisions.
Yeah.
Um, who have participated in CCDC, and I've noticed that. Wow, super big tangent here, but they're they're very strong candidates. So I'm glad you and I both had the chance to go there. Just a little shout out.
Well, let me dive into that for a second, because like we're talking about the human component, and it's not lost on me when you say that you're speaking to kind of the epitome of what it means to foster these soft skills, right? That then translate and complement the hard skills and translate into people who are effective employees or members of cyber teams. And so I think that's important, because we're talking about humans, which requires behavioral change. It's not a change in a programming code. It's not a new software. It's not new hardware. But to really build these skills takes repeated practice and action and reflection. And I think that, the strength of what that does when students have, or anyone has, an opportunity to really gain hands-on experience, is critical to building that efficacy of those folks when they come into the workforce, and also that resiliency. And we'll talk more about employee burnout and retention, and so forth. But I think there's something that connects that directly to what we're going to talk about.
Wow, I didn't expect it to go that way, but you're absolutely right.
I'm just trying to make a tangent less tangential.
Yeah, no, you did great, and now you've got me thinking, because I feel like I've been super lucky to have developed the soft skills that I have, and like to develop that passion for soft skills in my career. And I can't help but wonder how much of a role having a team building environment like a competition like that, like how big of a role that played in my actual brain development. Like, I know we always talk about like neuroplasticity of like little kids and like how they can all beat us in video games because they're like super, you know what I mean? Like super able to adapt and have that capability to learn. Um, Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like that's still at least a component in college, and to be able to have an environment where you're in that team building setting that maybe you don't always have in a college setting. Super tangent, right? But it's still it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, and it speaks to this idea that we use in our training of a social sandbox, where it's not so much about the tasks that you're doing, but who you are when you're doing them, what you're learning about yourself, what you're exploring, right? In kind of the playground model of like free range professional exploration is going out and trying things. It feels high stakes because it's a competition, but it's low stakes because there's not actually an adversary, and there's not actually an entity to defend, that has real world consequences at that point. So and I'll talk more about how I've come about creating these types of playgrounds, but I think that it is the right type of mentality, and learning from what that is what's happening, what that cohort is doing at the college level, I think is worth thinking about. How do we emulate that at the professional level? How do we bring people into these playgrounds so that they're not always under immense high risk pressure?
Yeah. So this is a great place to pivot, and I'll let you pick how we do that, because you mentioned that's part of what you're doing, right? As you've continued your career and really dedicating your working life to this research and how we implement this within teams. creating the playground, right, so to speak, and beyond that within cybersecurity teams, we start to hit those themes of, how did inclusivity play a role in the CCDC, and how did it play a role, in successful teams and unsuccessful teams? This aspect of psychological safety. Um, I wonder where you kind of naturally go when you start thinking about creating a playground, or however you want to frame that. Is it creating that inclusive environment first? Is it understanding how to create psychological safety? Where do you think we should take it?
Yeah, I'll start by this brings out my way early in undergrad, my initial interest in clinical psychology. It's about creating mental health and well-being, and how do we take care of the people who we need so desperately to remain in our organizations, and to do the best work that they can do. And to me, that's where my passion comes out, because, and 5 years ago when I had to decide, do I want to keep going down this path? That's what came up for me, was like, this is a population, a subgroup of employees around the world who could really benefit from an additional focus. Don't take away from the technical skills, don't take away from the technology, but an additional focus on them, an investment in the people who are doing this work. And so, yeah, we can kind of go through some of the data points that have been collected around this, some of the challenges and the ways we build it. And I wanted to set that table first, because it really comes down to, how do we take care of the people? We say the use of technology is a human task within my training curriculum. And if we want the technology to be well used and maximized, we have to maximize what we're providing to the people, and they'll reciprocate. People do. That's how we're all wired to some extent. If we're invested in, if people care about us, then we're going to show up.
Yeah.
And so, when there are a couple data points I'll share up front here. In a 2022 study by the organization Tynes, they reported that 64% of cybersecurity professionals say their mental health affects their ability to work, and that their work impacts their mental health. So it's another cycle of reciprocity, that if I'm in a good place, I can do good work, and doing good work keeps me in a good place. And I say good place, colloquially, but what I really mean is someone who feels mentally well and emotionally supported, to be able to function, at the level that they desire. And over a quarter of respondents to that survey of cyber professionals said their mental health had declined in the past 12 months. So listen to that. We have to listen to what people are saying. This isn't just a data report. These are real people. And if you have, 2 out of every 3 who feel strongly and are aware of how mental health and work, and their efficacy are related, and then you have 1 out of every 4 who explicitly identify that that their mental health has declined, we have to take that really into consideration, because if we're talking to board members, we're talking to C-suite members, the storyline here is that these are the people doing the work, and these are the people that you're either going to retain or you're going to lose. And the cost of losing an employee is totally underestimated. I mean, the hard number is that it costs twice as much to bring on someone new, because you have to pay for the recruitment and the application and the selection process and all the professionals in your organization who run those processes. And then you're also losing the organizational or institutional knowledge that they have. You're also losing the social connectivity that other people feel to them. There's some really important research about how some people who are central to a team or multi-team system, when they leave an organization, it creates a ripple effect. And so, the hard part about all this is it's people, and the data is messy and it's hard to quantify. But we've got to know intuitively that people are what are driving our cybersecurity and our safety. And they deserve to be commended, and they deserve to be valued, and they deserve to be invested in.
Yeah. Wow. Well stated. It's almost like you do this for a living. Yeah. The great points. Great points. And I mean, my first instinct is to think like, imagine. I mean, it's a very unfortunate thing to realize that 1 in 4 in that survey explicitly made that identification, right? Because there's some very serious consequences behind, um, you know, that state of mind. Um, you know, so yeah. I ultimately I think that's why we're having this conversation, why you're doing the work you're doing, and why I'm happy we're having the conversation. So,
Well, let's
um,
talk about the positive side of all this is what we can do to support the people.
exactly.
And so let's jump into inclusivity first. I think you listed that, and in the few important topics we're going to cover. I'll give my definition of inclusivity first,
Please.
which is everyone feeling valued and having a chance to be seen and heard. That language doesn't necessarily fit the highly technical, skill set of cyber professionals, because one of the biggest takeaways from the research that we did is identifying the generally egocentric or more egocentric nature of cybersecurity professionals, people who not egotistical. That's a separate subgroup of every industry. But what we're talking about are the wires, kind of the default ways of thinking for cybersecurity professionals, and it often is fostered early in one's career, even as a young kid, teenager, playing around. You're doing a lot of individual work. You're seeing individual outcomes, and as a result, you think a lot about your individual state of state of process and state of activity and your behaviors. And this is requiring inclusivity requires that we think about other people as equals, and that we think about other people. I guess a better way to say it is we think about other people equally in the way that we think about ourselves. And that requires expanding and really disrupting the way that many people typically think. And it's not just in cybersecurity, and especially in this day and age, and inter or post pandemic, wherever we are, there's a lot of focus on the self. And cybersecurity is not an individual game, and it's not even any longer a team game. It is a multi-team game. And so we've got to be playing with other people in mind. And that includes all the categories of inclusivity. That includes race and ethnicity and gender identity and age and years of experience or types of experience, neurodiversity, right? We have to be inclusive of all these things, and it all really comes back to individuals understanding the value that brings to them.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It's funny as you're talking, like you're hitting all the points that I wanted to hit. So it's great. But also, I'm trying to pick at what makes the most sense to dig into here. You mentioned what makes them happy. I'm curious if you can elaborate on that particular point, right? So inclusivity, I think more and more, hopefully, is something that people are wanting to pursue within the context of a cybersecurity team. Maybe, well, I don't even want to say besides the obvious, because maybe that's not a thing. What is that goal or the positive?
Yeah. Well, really, the core question that I pose is, what's in it for me? Where is this going to get me? And that is a totally fair question to be asking. Some people might say it's selfish, it's egotistical. I think it's human. And The challenge that we have goes back to how people typically are wired, especially as they come up early in their careers in cyber, is thinking about it from their individual standpoint. So, I think that wanting to be inclusive and being inclusive are different. I don't think it's about the values people espouse. I think it's about what they've seen, what they've practiced, what they've learned, what their past experiences are. But I dive into a few misconceptions around inclusivity. One is that inclusivity takes more effort than it's worth, which is to say that, like, oh, if I can't naturally be inclusive, that means that I have to go above and beyond all the effort I'm already putting into my job in order to include others. And that might not lead immediately to a better outcome for me. So what's my incentive? And that's why, we talk about the social sandbox and creating this playground atmosphere. It's about giving people a chance to see and explore and experience what inclusivity feels like. I had a great example from a client that we work with where we started a training series with them. So it's over the course of 8 workshops. And in the first workshop, there was someone, the newest member of the team had only been there for 3 months, I think, maybe 4. And we started running the exercises, started facilitating the conversation, started applying it to their work. And the whole time, this new person, totally silent, wasn't contributing to the group. And in my mind, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, does that person feel not included and maybe even excluded or not comfortable being included? Who's reached out to that person? What's their entry point? What are the barriers here? And we got to the end and people stayed, to continue debriefing. Some people had some extra time, and this new person was one of them. And he shared that he really was feeling more connected to everyone. Now, it didn't come in the form of him sharing, but it came in the form of him feeling seen and heard. Through the exercises, people were definitely checking in with him, asking for his input. They were, in that workshop, creating a new startup company idea as a total playground unrelated to their work. And in the big group, he wasn't saying anything. And so, really, to me, stuck out as a case study of, what inclusivity is. It's not always this overt, bring everybody in, everybody gets to, have the best chair at the table kind of mentality that I think people see as a barrier to trying it. It's really low level. It's really basic to make people feel included. They just want to be seen and heard. And they don't always have to speak up, or some people might think it interfere with what I'm already about to do. And so I think that's really important. The other misconception that often comes up is that being inclusive is going to tread on my autonomy. That if I bring other people into the mix, I'm going to lose, my independence, my decision making, the credit for the work I'm doing. And kind of, I'll close up this little soapbox here with, what's in it for me. Working by yourself is really great when things go well, or when there's no one to even check your work, right? Or there's no consequence. You do something, it works out, or it's low stakes, and you just keep doing it, and you feel good about it. That's great. I don't want to take away that experience. Working by yourself and not being inclusive, not bringing others into your space, not making space for them, is really challenging when things don't go well. Because then we end up at the opposite of mental health and well-being, because people start to feel shame, guilt, embarrassment, sadness, sometimes even grief, sometimes depression, to varying degrees. And I use those words, with gravitas, like that. Those are serious outcomes when you work alone and things don't go well. And being inclusive is what's in it for you. Being inclusive is what brings you that support, and it also benefits the other person, and that's a good thing too.
Yeah. Wow. I really like the highlight there on the good times versus the bad times, and I know that's a big part of your research, right? As well.
Yeah.
Um, I work in incident response, and those good and bad times are very easy to contrast against each other. And often the best teams I've been on, the most enjoyable, the happiest I've ever been, is that, on teams where when the hard times hit, you feel like you're just in it. Like you're in it together. You're operating like a well-oiled machine. Nothing's perfect, but it just feels
Right.
like, you know, you can operate in that fashion. Um, which I just think it does a really good job of highlighting um, why you should be inclusive during the times when it's not insane or there's not an incident or there isn't much stress happening, right? Like maybe it's right after the holidays or right before the holidays and things are slow. Um, it's still worth thinking about inclusion um, and so on. Just really quickly before we move on to one other topic here or another topic here is I'm just trying to think of like what being inclusive looks like at a very like simple level. Like if I'm just sitting at my desk and God, there's a whole nother aspect to this about remote working that we probably don't even have time for, maybe. But
I mean,
if I'm
there's no limit on the length of podcasts. Let's be clear.
that's true. That's true. Um, but if I mean I'm just sitting there, right? I come in the morning and I mean, what are some actions or very simple actions I could take if that's something that you have some ideas on, like to encourage inclusion throughout the day? And I guess that also depends on like who I'm working with, and there's so many factors there. But is there a
There's a lot.
generic rule?
To me, what always helps is to build habits, and to build habits, I find we have a framework in the training that we do where it goes best practice to tools to skills, right? So best practice, you already said it, being inclusive, right? The tools to do that, things like goal hierarchies, where let's map out our goals, how they're connected to each other. What are your individual goals? What are mine? What ultimately, what are we both working toward? What is the team working toward? The organization. Build that out. Give people a chance to check in, to share, and see where they fall within the big picture and what how you can support each other. Taking a team charter. You don't have to be a new team to set a team charter, but it can be, what's the language we're going to use around inclusivity? What do we do when we don't feel included? How can we explain that? The best person to tell you if they're included or not is the focal point of the conversation. So it's not my job to say I'm being inclusive. It's other people's jobs to say I feel included. And
Hmm.
so putting and I've named a couple tools, and this part of a big part of translating the research was creating a toolkit, because I think it requires some standardization at first, which feels a little sterile, feels a little transactional, and it gets you toward building the skill of being inclusive. And I think that practicing using it, communicating explicitly about being inclusive, checking in with people, giving people a chance to say how they're doing, where they're at, how included they feel right now. Those are hard conversations. They're not always comfortable. They're not easy. They're not natural, which is why I think tools help, because they give us a kind of third party opportunity to say like, no, we're using this tool. And that can open some channels of communication. But yeah, I really think the tool set and toward building those skills is where that change can happen most efficiently and effectively.
Got it. Yeah, that's helpful. It's definitely helpful to have tools, especially for topics like this where we might just be more comfortable talking about the technical side of things.
Oh,
So,
one other really practical tool I think that everyone can relate to instantly is it's called structured brainstorming. And at its core, it's a way for everyone to write down their ideas, turn them in, and then have them read anonymously and then talked about. Um,
Mm.
and I would say that's actually probably the best entry point for anyone listening, is get people to write their ideas down. Doesn't matter if you're the loudest voice in the room or the quietest voice. Everybody gets their ideas submitted. Every idea is read out loud. And to your point, Travis, this stuff happens better in the calm than in the chaos. So don't do it when you're trying to respond to an incident for the first time.
All
Don't
right,
do it for the
everyone,
first
get out
time.
your get out your post-it notes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's pause the incident. So
if
yeah,
only, if
that I
only.
think is actually a better illustrative example of being.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's a great one. And now that you even bring it up in that context, I can remember teams that have implemented that I've been on
Yeah,
that absolutely have. I mean, looking back on it, right? I don't think the focus was necessarily on inclusion, but it played a huge role in. I really liked being on that team.
yeah,
And that example actually pivots really well into the psychological safety aspect
100%.
of your research because I mean, my very basic understanding of this, I mean, I don't know how you, it's pretty safe to like have an anonymous thought, right? Like there's no, or the way I'm thinking about it, right? It's like nothing is coming back to, can come back to bite me. It's,
That's right.
the
No
understanding is,
retribution.
yeah. So can you talk about, what psychological safety is and how that plays into kind of the cybersecurity ecosystem and the human factor?
Yeah, we'll start with a kind of a concept we've already covered, which is psychological safety, similar to inclusivity, starts with a human perception at the individual level. And so when an individual perceives that they can share ideas openly, speak up, in any configuration of meetings or personnel, and also admit things like mistakes or share open thoughts that might not be received well, um, for them to see that there's a psychological safety net, that they're not alone when they do this. Um, Leaders and peers, value them, and everyone's in it together. And when you can close your eyes for a second and imagine what it is to feel that way at the maximum level, where I can just really be myself, right? Share my genuine, authentic ideas. And also, when things don't go well, or I make a choice that either I regret or had negative consequence, that I can talk about it with people. Um, I don't. I think it goes without explanation as to how that ties into mental health and well-being, into the
Right.
individual experience, but it also ties into the team and the multi-team system work. More ideas are shared. There's more collaboration. There's more agility. There's more adaptability. People feel more empowered. Decision making, happens at the next level. And again, if we're talking about the bottom line, like we're mitigating risk because people are talking about mistakes. You're able to fix mistakes. You're able to rectify situations that went against policy or didn't go as planned. Whatever that is, like, to create that atmosphere, is so critical. And again, not really the way the industry and the people in it are wired naturally. To be able to share an idea that I think you know might not be received well, or to say when something didn't go the way I planned and maybe even was considered an error. Um,
Right.
those things, it's so hard to measure the value, but it's so intuitive to understand how valuable it is.
Yeah, I think if I had, well, God, I feel like this might be a really hmm, privileged thing to say potentially if I will, but I feel like psychological safety for me has been probably the most impactful, like obviously impactful negative consequence that I've personally experienced. You know, no one likes that feeling of like you have an idea or a thought that you want to write. I mean, it could be an email, it could be you want to speak up, but then, I mean, it feels like this crushing, like, oh my God, can I say this? Like, is this even a good idea to like speak up about? Like, and there's so many, I mean, like anything, there's so many factors that come into play, like imposter syndrome and such. And putting all of that aside, there's a very real, and I'd say this happens in a lot of places, unfortunately. There is like this concept of like, I just don't feel comfortable saying it in this context for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Um, Man, it's a really important one.
Yeah. And I think for you to be vulnerable and transparent and, be aware of the privileged perspective, where you're coming from, because it does get more serious when there isn't psychological safety, depending on who you are and the environment you're in. Because we're talking about backlash, we're talking about retribution, we're talking about fear. Let's just leave it at that word. I mean, to be fearful in your workplace is clearly a safety hazard in its own right. And when we think about and some of the recent surveying work I've done has been exploring women and underrepresented groups and people from those groups who feel marginalized, they feel dismissed, they feel ignored, they face aggression or microaggression,
Right.
unconscious bias, and how do we get to a point where those folks, the folks who are already in vulnerable situations and positions and predispositions, can feel safe also, so that really everyone is bringing their full self to the table, being able to share their ideas openly, to know that when they make a mistake, that's not the step directly before being fired. Those are just really real experiences that it's so important to be in touch with, and to be aware of.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as a people manager myself, and probably other people who are listening who have connected with this idea of like psychological safety and not having that being such a massive consequence to not only like the function of your team, but like the mental health of the people that ultimately are your responsibility, report to you. um, I do wonder, like, what are some strategies we can deploy? What are some best practices? Um, it's got to be harder than just saying, I'm gonna make sure there's psychological safety, right? Like that's a really easy thing to say. I imagine it could be more difficult to deploy. So, what's your thoughts on some stuff I could work on, or others could work on?
Yeah, the first step I would recommend is assessment, understanding, and same with inclusivity, is understanding what are people's perceptions, because it's really easy to sit in a leadership position and be like, oh, everyone must feel included. They all, came to the happy hour, or everyone must feel included. They all submitted, their hypotheses for this, alert that we received. And same with psychological safety, like, oh, I think everyone's telling me, two people out of 10 tell you that something went wrong, and you extrapolate from that anyway, you get the point that, like, it's really important to ask people what they see and what they perceive. And part of my training is creating assessments and surveys, and so I really believe in the power of perception is reality, because that's where it needs to start to understand. And it could vary by team, it could vary by department, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be just at the organizational level. There's some targeted things when you start to understand what are leaders doing or not doing, within those subgroups of an organization. You can start to think about, one, the role of leaders. Are they role modeling? Are they reinforcing these behaviors? Are they showing up authentically and ready to support people when something doesn't go right? Are they being receptive to people's ideas, not necessarily implementing every idea, but providing space to hear them and responding, why that idea is or isn't implemented? I'll say briefly, because it's clicking for me, this stuff takes time. This is an investment in the same way that we invest in learning a new technology or a new skill, or we get a certification, in networking or something, or, all of the certificates and acronyms that exist in the field. So I want to be clear that, none of this happens tomorrow if you start tonight, or, it's not, this change isn't going to be next week. But some of the things, about changing habits, again, doing it in the calm, not the chaos, being proactive instead of reactive to those opportunities, and taking the small errors, taking the small opportunities for feedback and input, the things that might seem like they don't matter, or we're not in a crisis, response mode, so we don't need to reach out to everybody. But those are the times to create that sandbox where people can try and practice and explore and get their own data points, because what drives our perceptions are past experiences. So it's just really important, I think, to give those opportunities. Easy things for a leader to do or for peers to do is ask, what's working and what isn't working. Did everything go as you planned, or did some things not? Like, it's safe to talk about those things. And even using the word, do you think there were any mistakes made? Talk about it as a team, right? Don't call out the individual. Travis, did you make any mistakes? No. Like, all right, we just did a simulation. We just, we're in routine operation. Like, do you think we're making any mistakes right now? Are there any errors that we're noticing? What are the sources? Right? Like, it takes training. It's hard to, I wish there were faster solutions to it. But the process of getting there is really rewarding, and something that I value a lot, and the clients that I work with, really, really take to heart. I mean, it's about heart. It's about people. It's about connection.
Yeah.
It's not about, is the computer safe?
Yeah, man, that's an important thing to remember. I think everyone listening is likely a technologist. And I think that's a powerful thing to take away. At the end of the day, it's people. Um, the computer's not the most important thing. Um, I had two thoughts while you were talking
Yeah.
About emotional intelligence, because, well, so the first one being about emotional intelligence, because I feel like, I'm always trying to develop myself as a manager, as a leader, within cybersecurity, and there's always, and more so recently, there's always this focus on like your EQ, developing your EQ. This is directly, I would say, impactful to your development as a leader, your EQ, to building better teams, and then that's obviously why you're tying it into your work, but I don't think I really thought of it in that lens before, right? Of like trying to improve inclusivity and trying to improve the psychological safety of your team in order to, even just to selfishly develop yourself as a better person and leader.
Yeah.
Um,
And I want to put some language to the EQ piece that came out of the research we did. There's a framework of these 5 overarching soft skills, for leaders to embrace and to bring to their teams. One is resilience, decision making, adaptation, problem solving, and information sharing. I'm looking at the framework in front of me right now. And those 5, and we break them down actually into micro skills, we call them. But those 5 skills are all driven by EQ. Right? Resilience at a leadership and then a team level, and if you're leading a multi-team system, even more so, is about building rapport together. Right? It's about connectivity. And it's about that psychological safety. Decision making is about people being part of the process, feeling valued and being included. Adaptation is about how do you build a team that has a growth mindset where you're ready to move, you're ready to change, you don't take it personally. Problem solving, how do you go through hypothesis after hypothesis and decide, which one you're going to follow. And when you all decide to follow one, you're all in it together. And if it's the wrong one and you have to backtrack, you're all backtracking together. And information sharing. How do you get people to open up, share with the information they have, the thoughts they have, and also to reciprocate, right? In not only letting them know they're heard, but also valuing what they're bringing to the table in various ways. So, those are kind of they're not really soft or hard skills. I guess they're kind of more in the middle, but they're medium hard skills. But they're all driven by the soft skill, EQ, to your point.
Yeah, that's really good stuff, man. Both really, really important topics, really prevalent and prevalent's not the right word, but useful topics for leaders in the cybersecurity field, those who are looking to build these kind of environments in their teams.
Yeah.
And I think we're gonna. I know we had a ton of topics that I wanted to hit. I don't know if we're gonna be able to hit them all today. Maybe in another episode.
2 more episodes.
Yeah,
I know you.
I think,
but I feel
Yeah, maybe 3, man.
I want to be that regular guest for you.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I feel like, like on the morning shows, there's always like the doctor that comes in to like give the snippet on
That's right.
on the the health tip of the day. You're the doctor for our program, so I do appreciate that very much. The last thing I'll say before we kind of start to wind things down here, because I think it's a good ending point, because we talked a lot about inclusivity, psychological safety. My experience as a manager, I also feel like performance. This is going off on another tangent a little bit, but performance management is also a huge player in this for me personally, and I've experienced this personally as well, of setting up people to understand what actual negative performance means versus just normal everyday kind of performance. I think that plays a huge role in the psychological safety conversation about, well, hey, I know if I speak up in this, like I'm doing great on my other 3 initiatives that I'm actually being measured against. So I know my manager knows, if we're having a conversation and I make a mistake or I'm not quite right on something, that doesn't impact my performance. That just, I was just wrong, and it's a learning experience.
Yeah. Yeah, really interesting. One of the keys to performance management is, what do you want? What outcomes are you looking for? Right? What are you incentivizing? What are you reinforcing? And ultimately, what has repercussions? And I think cybersecurity is very quantified, and that's the way the industry tends to work. One of the challenges, to the individual perception, is how little control a person has over. This isn't going to directly answer your question in the time we have, but I think that this is something that I think about a lot. Is that if my metric for success as a leader is time to resolution, and you as a member of my team are evaluated based on your role in our time to resolution, then we haven't given you much control over what's happening, except that if needed, or maybe more often than not, you could falsify the resolution on the right. You could resolve a ticket early, essentially, prematurely, because there's not psychological safety, because you're being held to right. And resolution, this will be its own podcast. What are we really measuring when we say resolution, right? What are we certain of, and what do we hope for? So, I think the idea of performance management really should evolve more into having some objective and some subjective. It's not to say time to resolution is not a valid metric, or
Right.
a valuable metric, I should say. It's to say that there are also things that you're looking for out of your team that you're not measuring or that you're not using in your evaluations, or even developmental feedback
Yeah.
around this. And the perception of how much time we have of, to be able to observe and to track and to right, and also the risk of letting a person tell us what they think is going well, or to be part of setting their own goals, within certain criteria. Um,
Yeah.
I think we underestimate how valuable it could be to make that time, to give that opportunity, to invest in observing those behaviors, so that we know that it's not just about, what the ticketing system shows.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, hey, I think we covered a ton of good topics here. I
Yeah,
hope people got
way more
value.
than I even anticipated.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
it's
gonna go
crazy.
back and listen. I want to be the first listener.
Absolutely, man. I do appreciate your support throughout all the time. I've been trying to do this stuff, and I know people are going to find value here. I wanted to give you some time right here at the end before we close it. Where can people find you? What are you up to?
Yeah, we're in a transitional state, but right now you can find my work and the Integrate training program and the assessment evaluation stuff that we run for organizations at letswecan.com. And you can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, Daniel Shore, PhD, or Daniel at letswecan.com. And we have a ton of materials. A bunch of our training materials are up online, because we want people to really see, what we're all about, what we offer, and we feel like we're supporting people doing really important work, and we want to help the good guys. So that's where my co-partner in this work, Zach, and I come from, and really honor and a privilege to be on the podcast. Can't wait for our next episode, or when I come in for the tidbit. And yeah, and I'm sure you and I will connect soon.
Awesome, man. Thank you. I hope everyone listening goes and checks out Daniel's work at letswecan.com. Again, Daniel, I really appreciate you being on the show, and I hope you have a good one.
Awesome. You too, Travis.